All right, today we're going to break down some really fascinating research from an analyst named Jonathan. He's basically mapped out this whole network of connections between some very influential people. You've got hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, his wife, the academic Neri Oxman, and Ackman's firm Pershing Square. Our job here is simply to lay out the information that he's presented so you can see the full picture for yourself. Let's dive in. So this is the statement from Jonathan that really kicks the whole thing off. It kind of sets the stage for a much deeper look into a web of financial, institutional, and, personal ties. Just to be clear, our goal is just to present the information exactly as it's laid out in the source documents. To make sense of all this, we're going to break it down into a few key parts. First, we'll hit the central points of Jonathan's research. Then, we'll get to know the two main figures here, Neri Oxman and Bill Ackman. After that, we're going to follow the money and the institutional connections, and then at the end, we'll pull it all back together to see how it all connects. First up, let's just lay out the key events and entities that really form the backbone of this research. Think of these as the foundational data points that we're going to explore in a lot more detail. So Jonathan's research lays out a timeline of some pretty specific events. It actually starts way back in 2013 with a connection to Tsinghua University in China. Then, it jumps forward to late 2023 and early 2024, and that's when we see some major financial moves. This includes selling a piece of Ackman's hedge fund to a company called Menorah Miftachim and also buying a stake in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. And on top of all that, there are these philanthropic ties to some really influential think tanks, like the Rand Corporation and the Manhattan Institute. Don't worry, we're going to unpack all of this as we go.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we need to understand the people involved. So let's move on and start with a profile of Neri Oxman, looking at the background and career info that's presented in the source material.
So, who is Neri Oxman? Well, she's a really prominent designer and academic. She was a professor at the world-renowned MIT Media Lab. The research also makes a point to note her family ties. Her father, Robert Oxman, is a major figure in Israeli academia, a professor and dean emeritus at Technion, which is the Israel Institute of Technology.
The documents trace her career path, starting with her mandatory service in the Israeli Air Force. She then moved to the U.S. in 2005 to start studying at MIT, and by 2010, she was a professor at the MIT Media Lab. Then, in 2019, she married Bill Ackman.
Now, this is where, according to the research, things get a little more complicated. It points to a huge controversy that blew up at MIT while Oxman was there. And as you can see from these headlines, it all centered on the university's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and the donations he made to MIT and the Media Lab. And here's the direct connection that Jonathan's research highlights. And this is taken right from Oxman's Wikipedia page. An official report from MIT confirmed that her lab got $125,000 from Jeffrey Epstein. The report also says that Oxman and others from her lab had met with Epstein in person. All right, let's pivot now to the second key individual in this network, Bill Ackman. We'll take a look at his background in finance and philanthropy, again, as detailed in the research.
So who is Bill Ackman? If you follow the world of finance, you definitely know his name. He's a titan in that world, best known as the founder and CEO of the hedge fund powerhouse Pershing Square Capital Management. Before that, he co-founded another firm, Gotham Partners. And as we already mentioned, he's married to Neri Oxman.
Jonathan's research also zooms in on a very specific and, frankly, pretty controversial moment in Ackman's career. This was back in March 2020, right when the pandemic was kicking off. He revealed he'd made a massive bet against the market, a COVID crash hedge. The research states that right after this, he lobbied the Trump administration to shut down the country. This is a key event in the timeline we're looking at.
All right, so we've met the key players. Now it's time to start connecting the dots. This next section is all about the financial and institutional ties that Jonathan's research has uncovered, linking Ackman, Oxman, and their various organizations.
Let's start with this number, 4.9%. According to Jonathan's research, this is the stake that Bill Ackman's firm bought in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, or TAS, back in January of 2024.
So you might be wondering, why 4.9%? Why so specific? Well, the research points out something pretty crucial here. It's just under the 5.0% mark, and that 5.0% is the magic number that would have required Ackman's firm to officially report the purchase. Okay, now let's bring another key player into the mix, Menorah Miftachim Holdings. Jonathan's research states that this Israeli insurance and finance company invested in Ackman's hedge fund in late 2023. What you're looking at here is info about them from a research center called Who Profits, which tracks corporate activities. So what kind of company is Menorah Miftachim? Well, the Who Profits research, which Jonathan cites, paints a detailed picture.
It says the company is involved in financing construction in occupied territories, it helped finance a campus for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and it owns shares in companies that operate in the occupied Syrian Golan. But the connections don't just stop with business investments. Jonathan's research also digs into the world of philanthropy. What you're seeing here is a partial list of organizations that get funding from the Pershing Square Foundation, which is Bill Ackman's philanthropic arm. And here we can see some of the specific philanthropic connections that the research focuses on. The foundation supports the Rand Corporation and the Manhattan Institute, with both of those relationships starting in 2024. And remember that connection to Tsinghua University from our timeline at the beginning? Well, the foundation has been supporting the Schwarzman Scholars Program there since all the way back in 2013. We've covered a ton of ground. So for our final section, let's just pull all these different threads together and give you a clear summary of the whole network that's presented in this research. So, to recap, the source material maps out this network that starts with Nori Oxman's career, and it highlights her time at the MIT Media Lab and its connection to Epstein's funding. That then links to Bill Ackman's financial activities through Pershing Square, specifically that investment from Menorah Miftachim and the stake in the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Menorah Miftachim is then profiled based on its own business activities. And finally, the whole thing extends out through Pershing Square's philanthropic arm and its funding of these think tanks and educational programs. And we'll just end on this question. The whole point of this explainer was just to objectively present the information and connections as they are detailed in Jonathan's research. So by laying all these data points out, side by side, the final question for you to think about is, what does this network of information, when you take it all in as a whole, bring into focus?